"You're done, Spencer. Pack your things." The new CEO smirked, tossing my termination letter. He thought he was saving $3 million. He didn't know he was deleting their entire tech infrastructure. 8 years. That is how long I spent building Vanguard Tech Solutions from a 5-person basement operation into a proprietary software platform handling $30 million in annual recurring revenue. In the early days back in 2018, I was the one who personally wrote the database routing engine. It was not just some off-the-shelf framework. We had a high-throughput, low-latency relational mapping layer that handled transaction routing across 3 separate cloud environments. The industry calls it an algorithmic database routing engine. Our specific patent, registered under U.S. Patent 10,928,452, was the only reason our software did not crash when processing 50,000 simultaneous API calls. I knew every line of that code base. I knew the quirks of the memory allocation, the custom connection pools, and the precise security hooks that linked our data to our customers. Every morning, my routine was identical. I would arrive at the office by 7:30, brew a cup of black coffee, and log into the primary admin terminal. I checked the replication lags, audited the active Docker containers, and reviewed the pull requests. Vanguard was my life's work. I was the chief technology officer, and I held a 15% equity stake in the company. That equity was my retirement plan, my security, and the reward for the 80-hour work weeks I had put in for nearly a decade. Then came the announcement in early 2026. Vanguard Tech Solutions was being acquired by Caldwell Holdings, a massive corporate consolidator specializing in roll-ups of mid-sized enterprise software firms. The deal was valued at $120 million. According to our corporate charter, the acquisition would trigger a complete buyout of all minority equity shares. For me, that meant a clean $3.5 million after accounting for transaction costs and tax dilutions. It was the payout I had earned through blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. But mergers bring corporate sharks. Richard Caldwell, the founder of Caldwell Holdings, was a 68-year-old traditionalist who believed in raw scale and cost reduction. He did not care about the technical details, he only cared about the EBITDA multiples. However, Richard was stepping back, and his 32-year-old son, Oliver Caldwell, was appointed as the incoming chief executive officer of the merged entity. Oliver was a textbook case of nepotism. He had a brand new MBA from an Ivy League school, a collection of tailored blue suits, and an insufferable arrogance that made him believe he was the smartest person in any room. From the first integration meeting in late March, Oliver looked at me with clear disdain. To him, I was just an expensive legacy employee, a technical relic who was eating up a high base salary of $250,000 a year. He wanted his own people in charge. More importantly, he and Vanguard's chief financial officer, Gerald Briggs, realized that if they could terminate me for cause before the final merger documents were signed and executed at the end of the month, they could forfeit my equity buyout. Gerald was 50, a calculator with a heartbeat, who had survived 3 different corporate takeovers by aligning himself with whoever held the checkbook. I watched Oliver and Gerald huddled in the corner office day after day, reviewing the integration spreadsheets. They did not think I noticed. They did not think a tech guy understood the subtleties of corporate restructuring. But I did. I had spent months reviewing the legal frameworks of our contracts. I knew exactly what was written in Section 9 of the Intellectual Property Licensing and Transition Agreement. When Vanguard was first negotiating the merger terms, Oliver had insisted on a lean transition. He wanted the intellectual property transferred immediately. But my legal counsel had insisted on a specific safeguard. Because the database routing engine was patented under my name and licensed to Vanguard, the contract stated that the license was contingent on my active employment during the transition phase. If I was terminated without cause, the license would terminate, and the company would be required to purge all proprietary routing code from the codebase within 72 hours. Alternatively, they would have to pay a massive $5 million licensing fee to keep using it. Oliver, in his arrogance, had signed the agreement without consulting the specialized patent attorneys. He assumed that once the merger was approved by the board, All technology belonged to Caldwell Holdings permanently. He did not understand the difference between a software platform and the proprietary routing license that kept the platform alive. He saw the database engine as a simple utility, like office furniture or electricity, rather than the core IP that held their entire system together. During those final weeks, the atmosphere in the office turned icy. Oliver began micromanaging my team, demanding daily reports on minor server patches, and questioning my decisions on system architecture. I remained calm. I kept my head down, documented every interaction, and ensured that my private local backups of the patented routing engine were secure. I knew what was coming. The corporate machine was moving, and I was the target they wanted to remove. But they did not know that the entire digital empire they were buying was built on a foundation that I could pull out at any moment. I was ready, waiting for them to make their first move. The trap was set on a rainy Friday afternoon, just 3 days before the final merger documents were scheduled to be executed. I was sitting at my desk, analyzing a log of query execution plans, when my phone buzzed. It was an email from Gerald Briggs's assistant, requesting my immediate presence in the executive boardroom for a routine integration review. The subject line was flat and corporate, but the timing was suspicious. It was 4:15 p.m. In the corporate world, Friday afternoon meetings are never routine. They are where careers go to die. I grabbed my notebook, closed my laptop, and walked down the long glass hallway. When I entered the boardroom, Oliver Caldwell was sitting at the head of the mahogany table, looking pleased with himself. Gerald Briggs sat to his right, a thick manila folder open in front of him. There was no one else in the room, no HR representatives, no external legal counsel. That was my first clue that this was an off-the-books execution. Oliver did not invite me to sit. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepled his fingers, and gave me a condescending smile. "Spencer, thank you for coming. We have a serious situation, and unfortunately it involves you." I sat down anyway, placing my notebook on the table. "What is the situation, Oliver?" Gerald cleared his throat, sliding a printout across the table. It was a log sheet showing a series of unauthorized database access attempts on our staging server from an IP address mapped to my home network. At 2:30 a.m. last Tuesday, there was a significant security vulnerability exposed on our main client repository. A massive amount of unencrypted user data was accessed. According to our digital security logs, your admin credentials were used to bypass the firewall. I looked at the sheet. It was a clumsy fabrication. The logs showed an SSH connection using my old RSA key, which I had deactivated and replaced with a hardware token 3 months ago. Anyone with root access to the staging server, which Oliver's new IT director had been granted last week, could have easily injected those lines into the log files. It was a manufactured breach, a cheap trick designed to look like gross technical negligence. "This log is inaccurate," I said, keeping my voice flat and controlled. "The RSA key listed here was deprecated in January. My active logins require a physical YubiKey token. There is no record of a physical token validation in this log, because it never happened." Oliver slammed his hand on the table, his face flushing red. "Do not lie to us, Spencer. We have the server logs right here. You compromised the database of our top 3 clients right in the middle of a delicate M&A transition. This is a clear breach of your fiduciary duty. It is gross negligence, plain and simple." Gerald chimed in, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Under Section 4 of your employment agreement, termination for gross negligence or willful misconduct constitutes a for-cause dismissal. Because this is a for-cause termination, your 15% equity stake in Vanguard Tech Solutions is hereby forfeited. Furthermore, the double multiplier severance package under Section 8B is voided. You are being dismissed immediately, without compensation. They had spent weeks planning this. By accusing me of a security breach, they thought they could bypass the $3.5 million equity buyout and the $500,000 severance payment. They thought they could save the company $4 million and look like heroes to the board of Caldwell Holdings." Oliver stood up, sliding a single sheet of paper toward me. "It was my termination letter. Sign this acknowledgement, Spencer. We will agree not to press criminal charges for the data breach if you walk away quietly. We have security waiting outside to escort you from the building. Your company laptop and access badges must be surrendered immediately. I looked at the letter. My name was spelled correctly. The date was April 24th, 2026. The terms were clear: immediate termination, zero buyout, zero severance, and a waiver of my rights to sue for wrongful termination. A younger version of me might have screamed. I might have stood up, flipped the mahogany table, and pointed out the obvious logical flaws in their fabricated security breach. But after 25 years in corporate technology, I had learned that anger is a useless emotion in a board meeting. Silence and preparation are far more lethal. I looked at Oliver. He was smirking, confident that he had backed the old tech guy into a corner. He thought I was terrified of a criminal lawsuit. He thought I would sign the paper to save my reputation. I picked up my pen, but I did not sign the document. Instead, I drew a neat line through the signature block, wrote "refused to sign" in clear block letters, and pushed the paper back to Oliver. "I will not sign this," I said quietly. Oliver's smirk vanished. "You don't have a choice, Spencer. You are fired. Security is already on their way up." "I understand that I am fired," I replied. I stood up, picked up my notebook, and looked at Gerald. "And I understand the terms you are proposing. I will leave the building now." "You have nothing to say for yourself?" Oliver sneered. "No excuses? You just destroyed your entire career." "I have nothing to say to you, Oliver," I said. "Understood." I turned and walked out of the boardroom. In the hallway, 2 corporate security guards were waiting. They followed me to my office, watching like hawks as I gathered my car keys, my wallet, and my personal notebook from my desk. I did not touch the company-issued Dell laptop. I did not attempt to access the local servers. I did not make a scene. I walked down the elevator, walked through the lobby, and stepped out into the cool April rain. As I drove home, I felt a strange sense of calm. They thought they had won because they held the physical office and the corporate bank accounts. They did not understand that a software company is not made of bricks, mortar, or boardroom tables. It is made of code. And the code they needed to complete their $120 million merger was licensed under a contract they had just violated. The clock was now ticking on their 72-hour grace period. I arrived at my house at 5:30 p.m., the rain still drumming against my windshield. I walked into my home office, sat down at my personal custom-built workstation, and dialed Philip Mercer. Philip had been my personal attorney for over a decade. He was a specialist in corporate intellectual property, a sharp, methodical lawyer who spent his days reading the fine print of technology mergers. I explained the afternoon's events, focusing on the fabricated security logs and the termination letter. Philip listened in silence, the only sound on the line being the occasional scratch of a pen as he took notes. When I finished, Philip let out a dry, quiet laugh. "They actually tried the gross negligence angle? Without a third-party forensic audit? That is incredibly reckless, even for Oliver Caldwell. They wanted to avoid the $3.5 million equity buyout," I said, "and the $500,000 severance. They figured I would be too scared of a data breach accusation to fight back." "Well, they just made a fatal mathematical error," Philip said. "Let us look at Section 9 of the Intellectual Property Licensing and Transition Agreement. Under that clause, Vanguard was granted a temporary, revocable license to use U.S. Patent 10,928,452, your database routing engine, for the duration of your active employment. The agreement explicitly states that if your employment is terminated for any reason other than a validated, court-ordered for cause event, the license is revoked automatically. They have exactly 72 hours from the moment of termination to completely purge the licensed routing engine from their production codebase." "And if they fail to purge it," I asked, "then they are in willful infringement of federal copyright law, specifically Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 504. The contract specifies a mandatory liquid damage penalty of $150,000 per day of continued usage, plus an immediate right to seek an injunction to halt their platform operations. More importantly, the M&A agreement they signed with the acquiring banks requires them to warrant that they own or have clean, unencumbered licenses to all operational technology. The moment that license is revoked, their warranty is breached. The entire $120 million merger becomes illegal to close." "Let's draft the notice," I said. For the next 3 hours, Philip and I worked on the document. We did not write an emotional letter. We wrote a cold, precise legal demand. The Notice of Intellectual Property License Revocation and Mandatory Code Purge demand was addressed to the Board of Directors of Caldwell Holdings, the Executive Board of Vanguard Tech Solutions, and the transaction coordinators at the investment banking firm overseeing the merger. We attached the forensic proof showing that the security logs used to fire me were fabricated, specifically highlighting the deprecated RSA key and the lack of physical token validation. We then cited Section 9D of the agreement and gave them a strict 72-hour countdown, ending at 5:15 p.m. on Monday, April 27th, to remove every single line of my patented routing code from their systems. But I did not just rely on Philip's legal paperwork. I had a technical trigger as well. The database routing engine did not run in isolation. To manage high-volume transactions, it relied on a proprietary API gateway that managed the traffic routing tables. This gateway was hosted on a personal AWS tenant that I had registered under my own name back in 2018, before Vanguard even had a corporate credit card. Over the years, I had maintained the registration and paid the monthly hosting fees from my personal bank account, licensing the access point to Vanguard on a month-to-month basis for a nominal fee of $1. At 9:30 p.m., I logged into my personal AWS console. I navigated to the API Gateway configuration panel. I did not delete the servers. I did not destroy any data. I simply modified the access policy. I replaced the dynamic routing table with a hard-coded legacy route. This legacy route was a fallback mechanism. It could handle basic system operations, but it had a hard ceiling. It could only process a maximum of 500 API requests per minute. Under normal operations, Vanguard's enterprise clients generated upwards of 30,000 requests per minute during business hours. The moment traffic exceeded the 500 request limit, the legacy route would overflow the buffer, queues would stack up, and the main application database would lock up to prevent data corruption. I clicked Apply Changes, set the activation timer to trigger at precisely 8:30 a.m. on Monday morning, and shut down my workstation. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. For 8 years, I had been the guardian of Vanguard systems, spending my weekends fixing bugs and keeping the servers running. Now the systems were on their own. Oliver Caldwell thought he could run a $30 million software empire with spreadsheets and arrogance. On Monday morning, he was going to find out that spreadsheets cannot route database queries. I went to bed and slept better than I had in months. Monday morning arrived with a clear sky, but inside the headquarters of Vanguard Tech Solutions, it was the start of an operational disaster. At precisely 8:30 a.m., my personal AWS tenant activated the legacy routing policy. For the first half hour, the system held. The early morning traffic was light, mostly consisting of employees logging in and clients running basic reports. But at 9:15 a.m., the East Coast market opened and our largest enterprise clients, including Apex Logistics and Nexa Retail, began processing their daily transaction batches. The API gateway was immediately flooded with over 15,000 requests per minute. The legacy route could only handle 500. Within 60 seconds, the database connection pools filled to capacity. The queues stacked up like cargo ships waiting outside a closed port. The database server, unable to process the incoming queries, locked its tables to prevent data corruption. Across the country, the dashboards for every single Vanguard client froze. Apex Logistics could not print shipping manifests. Nexa Retail could not process customer refunds. By 9:30 a.m., my personal phone began to vibrate. It was a call from the lead infrastructure engineer at Vanguard. I let it ring and go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, another call came. This time from the Director of Customer Success. I ignored it. By 10 a.m., I had 12 missed calls and 19 unread text messages from various team leads. Meanwhile, Philip Mercer's formal legal notice hit the email inboxes of the Caldwell Holdings Board of Directors, the corporate legal counsel, and the lead transaction coordinators at the investment banking firm. The timing was deliberate. The investment bank was in the middle of preparing the final fund transfer wire for the $120 million acquisition. The moment their compliance officer saw a formal warning of copyright infringement and a threat of an immediate federal injunction, they halted the wire. Under M&A regulations, a bank cannot fund an acquisition when the target company's core technology's license is under active legal dispute. At 10:45 a.m., my phone flashed with a name I had been waiting to see. Oliver Caldwell. I let it ring to the end, then placed the phone face down on my desk. He called again immediately, and then a third time. On the fourth attempt, I picked up. "Spencer, what the hell did you do?" Oliver screamed into the receiver. His voice had lost all of its boardroom composure. He sounded panicked, his breathing ragged. "The entire system is down. Our clients are threatening to terminate their contracts. The integration servers are locked. Did you hack the database?" "I did not touch your servers, Oliver," I said. Keeping my voice calm and even, I surrendered my laptop and access credentials on Friday afternoon as you requested. I have not accessed a single Vanguard network since then. "Then why is the system routing failing?" he demanded. "Our new IT director says the database routing engine is rejecting all high-volume queries. He tried to rebuild the module, but the source code is compiled and requires a security key we don't have." "Of course he cannot rebuild it," I replied. "That routing engine is my patented intellectual property. U.S. Patent 10,928,452. The code is compiled because it is licensed to the company, not owned by it. Under Section 9 of the agreement, my termination automatically revoked that license. Your 72-hour grace period to purge the code ends at 5:15 p.m. today. Your new IT director shouldn't be trying to run it. He should be deleting it." There was a long silence on the line. I could hear Oliver's heavy breathing, followed by the muffled voice of Gerald Briggs speaking in the background. "Listen to me, Spencer," Oliver said, his voice dropping an octave, trying to sound commanding. "You cannot do this. We will sue you for sabotage. We will tie you up in court for the next 10 years. "You can try," I said. "But my attorney has already sent the forensic logs to your board and your acquiring bankers. They show that the data breach you used to fire me for cause was fabricated. The staging server log was modified using a deprecated RSA key. We have already initiated the filing for an emergency injunction in the federal district court. If that wire is not funded by 5:15 p.m., your merger fails, and Caldwell Holdings will owe Vanguard a $10 million breakup fee. Not to mention what your share price will do tomorrow morning, when the market finds out you blew a $120 million acquisition because you didn't read the licensing agreement." Oliver was silent. When he spoke again, the anger was gone, replaced by a desperate negotiation tone. "What do you want, Spencer? Let's be reasonable. We can work something out." "My terms are non-negotiable," I said. "First, I want the full $3.5 million equity buyout paid via certified wire transfer today. Second, I want the full $500,000 severance package under Section 8B. Third, I want a formal, signed letter of retraction from you and Gerald, admitting that the data breach allegations were entirely false, to clear my professional record. Finally, you will pay $25,000 to cover my legal fees." $4 million? Oliver gasped. "That is extortion." "No, Oliver," I said. "That is the cost of the contract you signed. You tried to save $4 million by fabricating a security breach. Now you have to pay it to save your $120 million deal. You have until 5:15 p.m. today. If the funds are not in my account and the signed documents are not in my attorney's inbox, by then we file the injunction. The clock is ticking." I hung up the phone before he could reply. I looked at the wall clock. It was 11:15 a.m. They had exactly 6 hours. The next 3 hours were a study in silent tension. I sat on the back deck of my house, watching the rain slowly taper off into a gray mist. On my laptop screen, I kept my bank account portal open, along with the monitoring console for my personal AWS tenant. At 2:45 p.m., the monitoring graph showed a sudden spike in request errors as client applications repeatedly tried to reconnect to the locked database. The legacy route was holding, bottlenecking the traffic, but the system was on the verge of a total breakdown. If the database remained locked for another 2 hours, the data replication pipelines would begin to desynchronize, causing permanent database corruption. Oliver's technical team was out of time. At 3:30 p.m., the deadlock broke. My attorney, Philip Mercer, called me. "We just heard from Richard Caldwell," Philip said, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "The founder himself. He bypassed Oliver completely. The old man is a pragmatist. Once his legal team confirmed the validity of U.S. Patent 10,928,452 and the terms of Section 9, Richard took control of the situation. He was not about to let a $120 million deal collapse because of his son's pride." "What did he say?" I asked. "He agreed to every single term," Philip replied. "He personally authorized the wires. Their corporate counsel has already sent over the signed settlement agreements. The letter of retraction is signed by both Oliver Caldwell and Gerald Briggs. It officially retracts all allegations of a security breach, stating that your departure was a standard administrative separation. It clears your record entirely." "Have the funds been initiated?" I asked. "Yes. The bank is processing the wire now. I have the federal transaction numbers. Check your account in 10 minutes. I refreshed my bank portal. At 4:15 p.m., the status changed. An incoming wire transfer of $4,025,000 had cleared. The breakdown was exact. $3,500,000 for my 15% equity buyout, $500,000 for the double multiplier severance package, and $25,000 for my legal expenses. I stared at the screen for a long moment. 8 years of 80-hour weeks, of skipped vacations, of late-night server emergencies. It was all accounted for. The corporate machine had tried to grind me up and throw me away, but the code had protected me. I opened my AWS console, navigated back to the API gateway configuration, and restored the original routing tables. I applied the changes. Within 3 minutes, the server logs began to clear. The traffic queues drained, the connection pools opened up, and the dynamic database routing engine resumed processing 30,000 requests per minute with a latency of less than 12 milliseconds. The platform came back online. The client dashboards illuminated, and the data replication line stabilized. The next morning, the merger of Vanguard Tech Solutions and Caldwell Holdings officially closed. The investment bank released the funds and the corporate press releases went out, celebrating a seamless integration of two technology leaders. But behind the scenes, the cleanup was swift. Richard Caldwell did not tolerate failure or legal liabilities. By the end of the week, Oliver Caldwell was quieted. He was stripped of his newly appointed CEO title and reassigned to a minor commercial real estate subsidiary in a small Midwestern town, far away from any technology decisions. His dreams of running a major software empire were over before they had even begun. Gerald Briggs fared even worse. The board of directors launched an internal investigation into the fabricated security logs. Falsifying digital server records to void an employee's equity stake constituted securities fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Gerald was terminated for cause without a single dollar of severance. He walked out of the building with the same security escort he had arranged for me, his reputation in the financial sector permanently ruined. As for me, I am retired now. I spend my mornings on my deck, drinking hot coffee and watching the sun rise. I do not miss the boardroom meetings, the server alerts, or the corporate politics. My former team members occasionally send me messages, telling me how the new management is struggling to understand the system architecture. I smile and delete the emails. The platform is theirs to run, but the foundation will always belong to the guy who wrote the code.